Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today to launch the next version of our preferred fiber materials matrix tool. My name is Beth Jensen. I'm Director of Climate Plus Impact at Textile Exchange, and I've got my colleagues Sam Pettifer and Connor Shannon on the line today as well. And we're super happy to be bringing you a bit of an overview of all of the different updates we've made to the preferred fiber materials matrix tool, and even a bit about what's coming next after this next launch. Just a few notes before we get started. A recording of this webinar will be emailed to you afterwards if you've agreed to receive our communications upon registration for this webinar, and it will also be available on the Textile Exchange YouTube channel. And as we go along here, please put any questions you may have into the question and answer box rather than the chat, please. We will leave some time at the end of the presentation for question and answer session. If there's some questions we don't get to or are unable to get to live, we will plan to compile responses that we'll share with everyone after the webinar. Okay, so moving on, the agenda for today will be really just to provide you with some key updates on what's changed since the last version of the Preferred Fiber Materials Matrix, or PFMM, we'll call it for short, and some of our high-level findings and conclusions related to this next version of the tool, how to access the tool, and then again, what's coming next, in terms of expansion of scope and other aspects of what we're planning for down the road. And I should note right off the bat that the Preferred Fiber Materials Matrix is formally launching on Monday, September 18th. So this webinar is just a bit, a few days in advance of that formal launch. So, again, we will be sharing with you how to access the tool when it does formally launch on September 18th. But wanted to provide everyone with a bit of an introduction now. Okay. So moving on, the Preferred Fiber Materials Matrix is really intended for two key user groups. So first, for brands to inform and guide their material sourcing decisions, and as well as for standard systems to take a look at their performance across different impact areas in a standardized way and sort of look at how they're each doing toward a shared direction of travel for standard systems. I should also note that this tool was initially developed and gifted to Textile Exchange by Gap Inc. So it was really, I think initially developed as a brand tool, but as we've gone through the development process, over the last several years now as Textile Exchange, we've really realized the value of this tool for the standard system community as well. And you can see here that the core impact areas that the standard systems are assessed against within the PFMM are climate, water, chemicals, land, resource use and waste, biodiversity, human rights, and animal welfare. And then there's also this initiative integrity category that measures the robustness and governance of a given standard system. And we'll talk a bit more about the updates that we've made to that. So passing along to Sam to give you a bit more information about some of the updates that we've made.
Thanks, Beth. Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Pettifer, Impact Tool Senior Manager at Textile Exchange. So firstly, starting off with the performance levels as a core concept that underpins the tool. You can see here that there are 5 performance levels outlined within the tool. Each impact area is assessed on a 100-point scale, which is divided across these 5 levels. It's a progressive scale that goes from 0, the baseline, through to transformational. It's important to note that each impact area is assessed across these levels, and we don't produce a kind of roll-up overall score for standard systems because we want users to focus in particular, looking at the impact area performance and understanding the strengths and weaknesses of each standard system. This is a more detailed look at how the preferred fiber and materials matrix looks now. This is a high-level overview. So at the top bar, you can see the material categories set out. For this example, we've taken cotton. the user can click into each material category covered. So we have cotton, synthetics, man-made cellulosic fibers, which is MMCF, flax, and wool. And then the 8 impact areas are set out at the top. Then you can see the performance of a given standard system against each of these impact areas. So here we just have an example of better cotton. We've got some notation beneath the name of the standard system, which is outlined in the key within the matrix. The first line under the name of the standard system denotes the tiers of the supply chain that are being assessed for that given standard system. So here we have F and IP, which stand for feedstock and initial processing. So in the case of better cotton, this is looking at farm level and ginning. And then the third level down with that notation MB stands for the claim system that is used by the standard system. So this stands for mass balance. And then the next level down, we wanted to show you what the detail looks like within each impact area. So for this example, we're looking specifically at the climate impact area. The user can hover over each impact area and click into them to see the details beneath each impact area. And at the top of the screen, you can see the titles such as ambitiousness of emission strategy, climate mitigation, climate adaptation, etc. These are the names of each indicator. You can see then the percentage score for each indicator and a description of the extent to which the standard system meets that individual indicator. So we wanted to take you through some of the key updates to the preferred fiber and materials matrix today. These can be split between kind of 2 categories of changes. One being methodological updates. So this public launch, when it becomes available on September 18th, signifies us bringing the methodology fully in-house at Textile Exchange. So previously, some of the indicators were sourced from WWF's certification assessment tool. We've been working to update the methodology, working with industry experts to inform updated criteria. And the focus of the latest updates have been on initiative integrity, human rights, and chemicals and toxicity. We've also been working on user interface updates to make it easy for the user to kind of navigate through the pages and also see the greater levels of detail in relation to performance of standard systems. Firstly, to know we've removed the overall score. Previously within the tool, there was an overall score that was assigned to each standard system, which was based on weighting across the various impact areas. We thought it was important to remove this because we want users to be focusing in on the performance across each impact area. We know that some standard systems are not designed to address all of the impact areas, and therefore we want the users to look at the relative performance of each impact area. We've then also given greater levels of detail on the underlying scores, so provided indicator scores, so the percentages that I shared on the previous slide. And we're also showing the combination of scores of paired standard systems. So for example, pairing organic regulation with a chain of custody standard. They're paired to show kind of a likely combination of standard systems that a brand would obtain within their supply chain. So you can see the performance of each standard system as well as their combined scoring. And now for a bit more detail on this, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Connor. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Connor Shannon. I'm an analyst with the Climate Plus team, and I'll be taking us through some of the methodological and user interface updates. To start off, we worked with New Foresight to redevelop the initiative integrity indicators. As Beth mentioned, these are a framework with which to measure the robustness and the strength of claims and governance for standard systems. These were previously sourced from the WWF certification assessment tool, and to develop the new methodology that was relied on heavily, as well as the ICL Code of Good Practice. Furthermore, stakeholders from Textile Exchange, WWF, and the World Benchmarking Alliance were interviewed to inform these criteria as well. Next up, we have human rights. We worked with Ergon Associates to redevelop human rights in line with the Climate Plus goals. Categories such as labor rights, economic and social rights, and civil and political rights, to name a few, were outlined based on the work that we did with Ergon Associates, the research on the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, the International Bill of Human Rights, and ILO core conventions, to name a few. This framework represents all internationally recognized human rights that are considered to be potentially impacted by activities involved in the production of one or more fibers or raw materials used in textile or fabric production, and assessed as being within the capability of private and voluntary standards to influence. As a part of this work stream, expert stakeholders were interviewed, and an open consultation period was held earlier in March this year. As a third bucket of our methodology updates, we worked with ZDHC to inform chemical management criteria updates. This extension applies to more than just practices regarding usage, application, and storage, among others. It is now incorporates guidelines on organizing training initiatives and conducting ongoing enhancement assessments on top of having those best practice criteria in place. These additional protocols ensure the adoption of top-tier chemical management practices and allow standards a way to adapt to emerging information and improved practices. So for the user interface updates, as was mentioned previously, we no longer display the overall level. As you'll see in the website currently, an overall level is displayed, and it's an aggregate of the environmental impact levels or impact areas that you see here. This has been removed in interest of facilitating a more nuanced and granular engagement with the tool, encouraging participants to look at the spectrum of scores across environmental impact areas in place of the overall score. Additionally, we've also separated paired standard systems for allowing users to see the performance of each standard at a granular level. And we'll go into that on the next slide. So what we see here is an example of a paired standard system in cotton. We have EU organic cotton and global organic textile standard at the processing level. Going across the top in the darker row, we can see the scores for the paired system, whereas in the two rows following, we can see how each individual standard system contributes to that overall score. So for example, in emission management, we see a paired system score of 33%, where 15% is contributed by EU organic cotton and 50% is contributed by GOTS cotton.
Thanks, Connor. We wanted to take you through some of the high-level findings and key messages based on our latest work on the tool. Firstly, we wanted to point out that standard systems alone are not a definitive solution to the environmental and social challenges within supply chains. They should be seen as a single tool that can be used by companies within a broader framework of due diligence strategies. They're not going to answer all of the challenges that we have. We've noticed that pairing standard systems can lead to greater coverage of environmental and social practices across the varying supply chain tiers. So, for example, having an organic regulation paired with a chain of custody standard can support the coverage of environmental and social practices across the supply chain. The preferred fiber and materials matrix includes both qualitative and quantitative indicators, and we find that this is helpful in providing a more holistic understanding of environmental and social performance. However, we note that there's a lot of gaps in data for the industry at the moment, which is why, as an organization, Textile Exchange is working with the industry to fund high quality life cycle assessment studies for the industry across material categories. Then in terms of the impact area performance, the impact areas that kind of require further action and are most significant to take note of are climate, biodiversity, and human rights. In terms of climate, we found that lots of standard systems have greenhouse gas reduction goals in place. However, details of monitoring, mitigation, and adaptation plans were lacking, and we found that there could be more information on this, and this pertains to our criteria. Further, in biodiversity, as an impact area, standard systems address this to varying degrees in terms of their strategy, but also their monitoring. We noted that very few focus on the protection and restoration of local habitats. This is a key area of potential opportunity and improvement. And then in terms of human rights, our latest assessments show that there's much more that standards can do to adequately protect and respect human rights in line with international norms and conventions. This is why it's really important for us to update the criteria in this space to not only form as an assessment approach, but also to help provide direction to standards to help raise the bar, to build impact and evolve towards participatory and inclusive approaches. And finally, we wanted to reiterate the point that the preferred fibre and materials matrix is designed to be an holistic approach to understanding the strengths and weaknesses of standard systems. And we really want users to get behind the detail and look at the individual indicator scores and performance and the descriptions that are in place. So when it comes to accessing the tool, it will be made available from September 18th, so not long now, and it will be available at pfmm.textileexchange.org for users to view. Beyond this, we'll be focusing on expanding the scope of the tool, initially to include further standards systems. We'll firstly be focusing on cotton to expand the standard systems included within the tool, as we note that this is a really significant material category for the industry, but also one in which there are many kind of standards in place. So we'll be firstly focusing on a batch of 5 standards, which include Cotton Connect Real, both the Code of Conduct and Regenerative Code, International Sustainability and Carbon Certification, which is ISCC, Regen Agri, and the US Cotton Trust Protocol. Then I'll hand over to Beth to speak a little bit about the future of the preferred fibre and materials matrix.
Yes, so we've made a great deal of updates here over the last several years since the previous version of the tool. We really intend for the preferred fiber materials matrix to even provide further guidance to the industry around what constitutes a preferred material in the view of Textile Exchange into the future. So a few things we have planned starting in 2024 beyond the updates that Sam just mentioned. One main thing is that we want to make sure that we can include in the future not only additional standard systems, but also branded fibers and other sustainability programs. And that will require a bit of an additional methodology update to be able to do that, because many of the questions in the PFMM or the indicators within the PFMM are written to be sort of specific to standard systems. So what we want to do as a next step is take a pass through and do a bit of structuring of the tool so that it can also be applicable to branded fibers and other sustainability programs in addition to standard systems. Another note is that The preferred fiber materials matrix is really what Textile Exchange will be referencing as our more detailed definition of preferred materials into the future. And that's why we really need to make sure that we can expand it beyond standard systems into the future as well. We also, I think as many of you are aware, published a high-level guidance document related to definition of preferred materials earlier this year. And so these two tools or these two resources will go hand in hand. The high-level definitions guidance is really sort of a 4-page summary, if you will, of the key concepts that are in the preferred fiber materials matrix at a bit more of a detailed level. And then actually I'll skip, as we're talking about tool connectivity, I'll skip down to the bottom bullet point there around the regenerative outcome framework that we also just published. The regenerative outcome framework is really even the next level of detail down below the PFMM. So you can think about it as 3 different levels. You've got the high level definition of preferred guidance, so the general guidance around what the key concepts are. You've got the preferred fiber materials matrix, which asks, today about standard systems, but in the future applicable to other branded fibers and sustainability programs, asks more general questions about what types of management practices are in place. And then the regenerative outcome framework is really the guidance for you to think about what actual outcomes you're measuring. So hopefully that makes sense in terms of tool connectivity, but happy to take any questions about that. The other point to note here is just that we really think about the preferred fiber materials matrix as the parallel, if you will, to the materials benchmark. So the materials benchmark is our benchmarking program annual survey that we do with brands in the industry to really collect information from brands on an annual basis and aggregate all of that to understand kind of how the industry is progressing against its goals and to enable brands to sort of benchmark themselves against one another. The preferred fiber materials matrix is basically provides that same purpose, but for standard systems, branded fibers, and other sustainability programs into the future. So we really have now these 2 different tools that can provide that sort of that benchmarking and shared direction of travel to these 2 different user groups in the industry, which is really exciting. And then finally, we are also planning for the preferred fiber and materials matrix to be embedded within the materials benchmark so that when brands are reporting in on the different volumes of fibers that they're using, the preferred fiber materials matrix will feed into part of the scoring related to those fibers that are being reported. And I think that's all we have for you today in terms of the updates and the overview of the tool that's coming out. We can go to the thank you slide, I think, and take any questions if folks have them. Yeah, we're really excited to launch this tool on September 18th and looking forward to seeing it in broader use. I think the previous version that was last released several years ago was a member-only tool. It's now going to be public on the Textile Exchange website, so we're really excited about that as well. And as you could see from the overview that Sam and Connor provided, we've spent a great deal of time engaging with a number of different expert organizations in the industry. So this is by no means something that Textile Exchange has put together in isolation. We've really relied on a number of different third-party expert organizations to feed in and to make sure the tool is as robust as it can possibly be. So let's see if we have any questions here. First question is, can you explain how to interpret the percentage scoring again? I'm assuming a higher score is better. Sam, do you want to address that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the percentage scoring, this is made available at the indicator level. So beneath the impact areas, so for example, climate, you have a performance level score, which is on the scale of 0 from baseline through to transformational, which is level 4. And then below that, you have the indicators within climate. So for example, emissions management. The percentages relate to the indicators, such as emissions management. And essentially, yes, the higher the percentage score, the better the performance for that indicator. Hope that answers your question. And then the indicator scores then roll up to give you the impact area score and the performance level.
Yeah. Hopefully that answers your question, Sam. But let us know if not. The next question, and I'm happy to take this one. Internal product development teams will look for clear guidance on which fibers to move away from or towards. Previously, the overall scores helped us to do this, i.e. moving towards level 2, 3, 4 fibers. Well, each brand now need to determine themselves which fibers we want to move towards. So I think the way that I would answer this question is that the tool still provides what you're asking for. The tool still provides that, but it provides it within the context of, are you asking the question about climate impacts, or are you asking the question about chemistry impacts or biodiversity impacts? The challenge with the roll-up scores that we faced previously is that you can't really consider these impact areas an apples to apples comparison against one another. And in fact, many brands have different views or interpretations on what they want to prioritize, frankly. So what we want to do is encourage brands to look within those categories to say, okay, if I want to optimize for my climate impacts, I will look at this category. But again, we also really encourage everyone to be looking at a holistic view of impacts. So to be looking across the tool and looking at the different trade-offs within these different categories is really how we intend for this to be used. So, trying to provide a roll-up score that rolls up climate with, biodiversity with human rights impacts becomes really, really challenging, and frankly, not a great directional having that roll-up score isn't really that helpful for teams, honestly, because it doesn't provide that nuance of, well, something is scoring well in climate, but not necessarily in human rights or vice versa, just because that standard is intended to be used perhaps in conjunction with a standard that focuses more on human rights. So we didn't want to penalize different programs for just for the reality of the scope, which they've covered or have historically covered in the past. So hopefully that answers your question. It absolutely still provides you that guidance in terms of how different standard systems are scoring within those different categories. It just doesn't provide the overall score for the reasons I just described. Okay, next question is, will all standards and programs be in the matrix? So the question here is define all standards and programs. We're going to try to get as many standard systems as we can. Programs is where it becomes a little bit nebulous, I would say, in terms of how do you define a program. But one of the things that I didn't mention that's another piece of the next steps that we'll be taking in terms of further development of the tool is to make this a self-reporting tool so that standard systems, branded fibers, other programs can come in and assess themselves, and there will be a verification process against that in the exact same way that we currently run the materials benchmark today, where brands report in themselves and then we verify the information that they're reporting in. And more to come on the details of that specifically, but we want to do that for a couple of reasons. Number one, for equity between, these two different user groups. So, not holding sort of one group to a different standard than the other in terms of how they report in. But really also just to make sure that we can scale the different types of programs that are included in the preferred fiber materials matrix. Right now, the process is such that the textile exchange team does the first initial review, and that takes an estimated 40 hours of one person's time just to do one initial review. And then we go back and forth with the program or standard system at this point in time to make sure that the standard system is comfortable with how they've been assessed and that we haven't missed anything. And again, the tool is based on publicly available information, so we have to make that very clear as well. But yeah, so having a self-assessment process with then some kind of verification on top of that, we believe will really enable us to have a much more efficient way of getting more standard systems and programs into the tool into the future. So hopefully that answers that question. Let's see. How will this complement existing tools like HIG or Apparel Impact Institute? Let's see. So the latter, Apparel Impact Institute, is just a partner organization. I would say that's not a tool. The way that we think about Textile Exchange's partnership with Apparel Impact Institute is that AII really focuses on factory level impacts, facility level impacts, and we as Textile Exchange focus on raw material related impacts. So we work very closely on a number of different fronts in partnering with Apparel Impact Institute, because we have this really nice sort of division of where we're focused and the scope of our work and our expertise. So that's to answer that one. How will this complement existing tools like HIG? Great question. I don't think we have a specific answer to that right now. Certainly the HIG index tools are one set of tools that can be used, for brands in their toolbox, for brands and suppliers in their toolbox in terms of assessments, and making informed decisions about, the different materials that you're choosing and how to design products, and working with suppliers and so forth. No specific connectivity to that at this point in time, but certainly open to working with the Sustainable Apparel Coalition on any more direct connectivity of all of these tools together. Let's see, Francesca, I would like to ask one question. The evaluations made by the PFMM will be used in the attribution points in the materials benchmark for suppliers. I'm not sure I totally understand this question. Just to reiterate, and Francesca, we can follow up with you afterward to provide more clarity, but just to reiterate how we intend the PFMM to be used within the materials benchmark. So the materials benchmark today is primarily used by brands. A handful of suppliers are using it as well, but it's primarily used by brands. And the intent is that the PFMM will provide sort of that part of the scoring where we look at kind of what different types of materials are being sourced and how those sort of end up feeding into the overall score that you receive in the materials benchmark. So whether you're sourcing different types of cotton, different types of from different types of cotton schemes, or from different types of wool schemes, or whatever the case may be, we'll be using the information in the preferred fiber and materials matrix for that data point that feeds into your overall score as a brand in the materials benchmark. So more to come on that. That will be a several year process though, just to get that integrated. And also we need to have the self-assessment functionality set up for the PFMM before we can do that, because we don't have, we feel like we want to have a broader range of standard systems and programs and branded fibers in the PFMM before we fully embed it into the materials benchmark. So just to note, there will be a several year process to make that happen. Okay, let's see. PFMM seems to have some overlapping functionality with the worldly MSI tool. Is the PFMM meant for brands to use in place of the MSI, or was this not considered? So here's maybe a better way to talk about the difference between the MSI and the PFMM. The MSI is life cycle assessment data. It's hard data. We do use the HIG MSI data as one piece, so the quantitative piece of this tool, but the intent of the preferred fiber materials matrix is to provide a broader view of holistic impact beyond what can be measured by life cycle assessment data today. So we actually, created a number of qualitative indicators, and that's where we relied on a lot of the expert input that Sam walked you through with the different partner organizations that we've worked with, like ZDHC and the chemistry indicators, for example, and created these qualitative indicators so that, yes, you can look at, from a purely quantitative LCA focused perspective, you can look at the HIG MSI, or you can look at the Qantas Waldeby database, or a number of others. But what we wanted to do was then layer on top of that quantitative data, a number of qualitative indicators as well. And Sam, remind me again, I don't mean to put you on the spot if you need to look this up, but what are the what's the breakdown of the quantitative versus the qualitative indicators in the tool? Do you remember that offhand? I can come back to you if needed.
I don't have the exact breakdown, but the indicators sit across climate, chemicals, and water, and they comprise of 50% of each of those impact areas.
The quantitative indicators from
Yeah.
the HIG MSI. Yes, correct. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we have the other portion is comprised for those specific impact areas is comprised of the qualitative indicators. And then for the rest of the impact areas, those are not covered by LCA methodology today. So those are all the qualitative indicators that we, again, in conjunction with our partners, have come up with. So hopefully that answers that. Next question, just a note, you mentioned oranges and apples, PFMM, and now materials benchmark. A bit comparing oranges with apples when putting on the same scale different raw materials with very different impacts. I find it a bit confusing, especially for the materials benchmark, if one wants to compare with other peers which have very different raw material sourcing profiles. That's a great question. I think, again, the integration into the materials benchmark it's going to be a several year process. So I think we will definitely be reaching out to kind of get more input and feedback on how to best do that. But what I would say is that right now, we sort of have a placeholder methodology, if you will, for how you score different types of materials within the materials benchmark. And what this will do is make that more consistent across the board. But yeah, I mean, I know that probably doesn't fully answer the question, and happy to follow up on this one afterward as well. And particularly with our material benchmark team, because they may be able to provide a bit more sort of specific information about what the intent is there. But again, that's going to be a several year process. It will not be, something that will happen overnight. And we want to think really, really thoughtfully about how we do it. But I mean, the alternative is to create some kind of separate methodology for how different materials get scored within the material benchmark. And what we'd prefer to do is just embed this existing methodology that we have. So more to come on all of that, though, is what I would say. Is there any indicator for durability of garments? No, we did not do a durability indicator within the preferred fiber and materials matrix, again, because this is really intended to sit at sort of, raw material extraction and initial processing impacts at that level. Sam, I don't know if you have anything you want to add on that one specifically.
Yeah, sure. I would just add to that we're assessing standard systems within the PFMM at the moment. So we're not looking at the material, I suppose, as a whole, or the category as a whole. We're assessing the performance of standard systems. But with the developments that we're working on, we'll be expanding the scope to branded fibers and also other types of sustainability programs in the future. Not kind of focusing in on assessing the material as a whole, let's say.
Yeah. Next question, will volume availability of different fibers become something that you factor into future development? Interesting question. I don't know that we've considered that yet, but something to think about for the next version. It's not really an impact. Yeah, like again, we're looking at holistic view of impacts here. So again, using quantitative and qualitative data to get to that, and qualitative indicators. I don't know. Volume of fibers isn't really an impact indicator per se, but interesting thought. We'll take that one away. How will the PFMM help companies when considering regulatory compliance with the Green Claims Directive? Ooh, great question. So the first thing I would say is just to reiterate what we previously discussed in the webinar, which is that this tool should not be used to make public-facing claims. It is not intended to do that. It is intended to be an internal decision-making tool. So just first to say that, and also just to say specifically that this tool is not intended to be used for any sort of regulatory compliance work. You should definitely, be in contact with your trusted policy and regulatory professional advisors on this. But what we would say is that in general, the tool is designed for brands to, help inform sourcing decisions, and to understand the trade-offs of different standard systems and ultimately other materials that they may look to select. It doesn't give you a specific impact score. It does not say you should choose one over the other, because again, what do you want to optimize for as a brand? Do you want to optimize for climate? Do you want to optimize for human rights? Do you want to optimize for land use or chemistry? Like, these are all different trade-offs that can be made, which again is why we made the decision to remove the overall roll-up score. But what we hope it does is provide a standardized way to look at how these different standard systems perform within these different categories. So no specific answer on this one, because I think, again, the Green Claims Directive is all about making public-facing claims, and this should certainly not be used for that purpose. And we do not endorse using this for that purpose. But again, as an internal decision-making tool, I think it can help you understand the different considerations that you should be looking at to inform your strategy related to claims and labeling. Define standard systems versus programs. Thank you. Let's see. I'll take a first swing at this, but Sam, feel free to jump in if you'd like. I mean, I think when we think about a standard system, it's a formalized, a formalized standard, ideally one that is following the ICL Code of Good Practice and is part of that community. But there are many others as well. And then a program is just kind of our catch-all category for everything else, where it's a specifically managed program, but it might not be a formal certification, a standard and certification with that, type of formal process in place. But Sam, I don't know, maybe you have a more eloquent way to talk about the difference between the two.
No, I would just add that with standard systems, there's often criteria documents in place that are audited against by the certification bodies. That's what I would add.
Yeah, right. That certification body piece of the process. Yep, exactly. How does this exist in relation to the unified standard? That's a good add-on question here. So the unified standard, once that is launched, will be assessed within the preferred fiber materials matrix, just as we've already assessed the textile exchange standards that are in use today. So, yep. And how are feedstocks from recycled resources quantified? It looks like, Sam, you're maybe typing an answer on that one, so that's great. Any other questions? These were great questions. I've come to the end of the questions list. Any other questions that folks have now? No? If not, then I think we'll wrap up. And thank you so much for all of the great questions. And hopefully you are as excited as we are about launching this next version. And as with all tools that we develop as Textile Exchange, this will be an iterative process. As we've discussed, over the next several years, we have a plan in place for how we, make this even more efficient and effective as a tool, how we can embed it into some of the different, other resources and tools that we have. So much more to come on all of this, but thanks so much for your time today, and to the team for their work on getting this tool into a place where it's going to be launched again on September 18th. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, thanks again, everybody. Have a great day.